In this lecture, we need to make a huge decision. Where can the player walk? In our game, we have two tile maps. Players should be able to walk on both tile maps. To get to the second tile map, there's a ramp for reaching this area. At the moment, Unity does not know which areas are walkable. We must update our map to have walkable areas. Typically, there are two features available for accomplishing the same thing. We can use physics or navigation meshes. If you've watched a YouTube tutorial or have taken another course, physics is the most common solution. I think it's a fantastic solution. If an object has a solid mass, players should be able to stand on the object. Alternatively, you can create obstacles with physics to prevent players from reaching specific areas on a map. The next feature is called the navigation mesh. Unlike the first solution, physics is not taken into account. Instead, Unity implements AI for detecting walkable areas. Both solutions are excellent. You can even combine both to create a smarter game. There are pros and cons to each feature. Physics can be unpredictable. One wrong setting can cause the player to fling around the map. However, it can be pretty powerful for creating an interactive game. Navigation meshes are predictable and reliable. However, they can be challenging to fine-tune. Getting the desired results can take a bit of work. For this course, we're going to use navigation meshes. I find them easier to understand. Best of all, we can visualize walkable areas as we fine-tune the mesh. Adding a navigation mesh is simple. By default, this feature is shipped as part of the core of Unity. We do not need to install a package to start using it. Under the Window menu, navigate to AI Navigation. This option opens a window for configuring the AI. Let's merge this window with the inspector. There are 4 tabs available. The first tab is called Agents. These settings refer to the objects that can move on the map. An example would be the player. The next tab is called Areas. These are a list of colors that will be applied to our map. Unity can show us which areas are walkable or non-walkable. It's a handy feature for helping us adjust the map. The third tab is called Bake. We're going to skip these settings. We'll revisit them in a moment. Moving on, the last tab is called Object. These settings allow us to adjust the settings for objects other than the agent. The main focus of this lecture will be the Bake tab. In the real world, baking is the process of cooking food with heat. However, there's more to it than that. When you bake something, you're typically baking multiple ingredients. For example, you may be baking cookies with chocolate chips. Before baking cookies, you combine the dough with chocolate chips. Neither ingredients are thoroughly ingrained with one another. I can freely remove or add chocolate chips. Once I start baking, there's no turning back. The dough and chocolate chips are baked together to create a new flavor profile. This idea of baking applies to 3D modeling. If you ever take a 3D modeling course, you will often come across this term. The idea of baking in modeling refers to transferring details from one 3D model to another 3D model. As a result, you'll be given a single 3D model with information from the original models. As we know, all 3D objects have a mesh. As a reminder, meshes describe the vertices, edges, and faces of a model. In our game, the tiles and player are created from meshes. Unity is capable of creating meshes on the fly. The navigation feature can draw a mesh. However, this mesh is not meant to be a standalone object. Instead, Unity will try to bake this mesh into our game. Under the Bake tab, we have options for modifying the baking process. Without modifying these settings, let's try baking the mesh. Press the Bake button. After doing so, nothing happens. Why not? Before we can bake an object, we must allow it to be bakeable. Otherwise, all objects would have an unnecessary mesh. Navigate to the Tiles folder. Enter Prefab Edit mode for the beach tile. Next, select the object from the hierarchy. After doing so, switch to the Object tab from the navigation window. Under this tab, we can modify the object's mesh to allow baking. If an object does not have the mesh renderer component, these settings may not be available. Let's check the navigation static field. If turned on, we're telling the AI that this object can be baked. The baking can be refined further. The area field can be changed to walkable, non-walkable, or jump. If the option is set to walkable, the player will be able to walk on the object. The non-walkable option prevents the player from walking on the object. Lastly, the jump option allows an area to be jumped over. Let's set this option to walkable. Next, let's exit Prefab Edit mode. Back in the navigation window, switch to the Bake tab. Press the Bake button. This time, things are different. Using AI, Unity was able to draw a mesh over our tiles. During this process, it baked the new mesh with the current mesh for the tiles. The areas drawn in blue are walkable. If the navigation mesh is not visible, you can turn on the mesh by updating the settings in the Scene window. At the bottom right corner, there's a mini window called Nav Mesh. There's an option for toggling the visibility of the navigation mesh. This window is only available when the navigation window is active. Enable this option to view the navigation mesh. Let's work on the other tiles. The process is the exact same. The following tiles will be walkable: ground grass slope tile and ground grass tile. I'm going to quickly set their mesh to be walkable. Let's go through them. First, enter Prefab Edit mode for the ground grass slope tile object. Under the Object tab, turn on the Static option and set the Area option to walkable. Next, let's do the same for the ground grass tile object. During this process, Unity notices that this object has child objects. Previously, we added flowers and grass to the ground. In some cases, you may want the AI to take these objects into consideration. For our game, the child objects will not be static. Next, set the area field to walkable. Lastly, let's rebake the navigation mesh. Be sure to exit Prefab Edit mode. Under the Bake tab, click the Bake button. The second tile map has been baked. However, not everything is perfect. There are a few noticeable problems. Firstly, the ramp is not walkable. Despite being configured to be walkable, the AI has decided it's not walkable. In addition, the cave is not walkable either. Players should be able to move slightly inside the cave entrance. These issues stem from the current configuration. We must adjust the settings of the agent to receive better results. In the next lecture, let's begin tweaking the settings.